Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Jesse Weber. We have breaking news for you, and that is that the probable cause affidavit in the Idaho 4 murder case has officially been released, and we are learning new details about what led police to arrest suspect Bryan Kohberger. Talking about him for a minute, he's expected to appear in court today after being extradited back to Idaho. He's accused of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He's also facing a burglary charge. We know that the suspect arrived yesterday evening to the Latah County Jail hours after authorities flew him out from Pennsylvania, where he was later booked. And a lot of people across the nation are interested in this case. We are going to take your questions, so please submit them on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. But right now, we have to break down this probable cause affidavit. As I said, we are learning things that we did not know before. As you can see, I'm casually dressed. We had to jump on the air immediately to get this to you. I want to bring in my 2 special guests to talk more about this. I'm joined right now by law enforcement instructor Sonny Slaughter. I'm also joined by forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. It is great to have you both here. I'm going to start with you, Sonny, and I'm going to start with one of the most shocking revelations in this probable cause affidavit, which I will tell you is more detailed than I would have imagined. It's about 19 pages. First up, we had a lot of questions about the 2 surviving roommates that were on the ground floor in that house. According to the probable cause affidavit, I'm going to read it for everybody. DM, who is one of the surviving victims, she said, DM stated she opened her door for the 3rd time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. DM described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past DM as she stood in a frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the back sliding glass door. DM locked herself in her room after seeing the male. DM did not state that she recognized the male. This leads investigators to believe that the murderer left the scene. Now, later on in this probable cause affidavit, when they were able to determine that it might have been Kohberger, they looked at his license plate and noted the bushy eyebrows. The idea that someone in this house saw him is unbelievable. What's your reaction, Sonny?
It's absolutely unbelievable. I'm just printing out the affidavit right now and trying to go through it, right before we went on the air. This is one of the most detailed affidavits that I have ever seen. And this is the reason why they got the guy. There's nothing to suggest that he was not present. They have the DNA, they have everything that they need, but more importantly, it's the eyewitness, the details and the level of detail that law enforcement has provided in this affidavit. There's no reason and there's no way that a judge would not have weighed in and said this is absolutely necessary.
So, a few things to note. Again, throughout this discussion, he is innocent until proven guilty, but what this lays out is the probable cause by which they felt necessary to arrest him. What is so eerie is to hear this account of the roommates. They heard people saying in the upstairs room to the effect of, there's someone here. They heard one of the victims say that. They heard a voice say, it's okay, I'm going to help you. Possibly from the killer. Now, Joseph, I'm going to go to you because this is something that we had suspected about the murder weapon. Now, I will tell you the murder weapon has not been recovered, but this is what we have. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogan's right side, Madison Mogan, one of the victims, when viewed from the door. The sheath was later processed and had K-Bar, USMC, and the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and Anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA, the suspect profile, left on the bottom snap of the knife sheath. Now, of course, that's important, Joseph, because we had suspected for a while that, and we actually had Phil Waters on our Sidebar podcast who said this could be a K-Bar military-style knife. Now, just to reiterate this, later on in the affidavit, they did a DNA test. And what they did is on December 27, 2022, Pennsylvania agents recovered the trash from the Kohberger family residence located in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. That evidence was sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing. The next day, the Idaho State Lab reported that a DNA profile obtained from the trash and the DNA profile obtained from the sheath identified a male as not being excluded as the biological father of suspect profile. At least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. Joseph, what do we make of that?
You're going head to head with numbers. Numbers always win in the end. All speculation, supposition, all of that stuff is out the window. When you have these specific scientific tiebacks, and as you had mentioned, we had suspected a sheath for a while. We heard about military-style knife. We heard somebody throw out a term, Rambo knife. We didn't know what the genesis of those terms were or where it was coming from. And we did, in fact, hear the term K-bar. We've talked about this for a while, and it is a specific knife. The thing about these types of knives, hunting or military-style knives, most of the time, they come, you purchase these things with a sheath so that you can put it on your belt, all those sorts of things. The fact that it's adjacent, this DNA is recovered adjacent to the snap on it, which holds it in place, is significant. This goes back to a manufacturer, and it also, this DNA ties back to him. It is incredible evidence. I didn't think we were going to have this much.
So I'm going to read portions of this affidavit because it literally came down 5-10 minutes ago. People have not heard it, so I'm going to read portions of it. This is very interesting. This is something that online sleuths were thinking once he was arrested. Did he make a Reddit post? Well, this is what we know based on the probable cause affidavit. Based on information provided on the WSU website, Washington State University, Kohberger is currently a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. Pursuant to records provided by a member of the interview panel for Pullman Police Department, we learned that Kohberger's past education included graduate degrees in psychology and cloud-based forensics. These records also showed Kohberger wrote an essay when he applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department in the fall of 2022. He actually applied for an internship with the police department. Kohberger wrote in his essay that he had interest in assisting rural law enforcement agencies with how to better collect and analyze technological data in public safety operations. Kohberger also posted a Reddit survey, which can be found on an open-sourced internet search. The survey asked for participants to provide information to, quote, understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. There has been a lot of speculation about why someone like him would have done that. This is something that came early on. I want to go back to the discussion of the initial impressions from the surviving roommates, because I think that's really key. Again, we talked about the K-bar style knife. As part of the investigation, numerous interviews were conducted by Moscow Police Department officers. They interviewed the two surviving roommates. And this is what we, and again, what they start off the probable cause affidavit, basically going through what we know already, the timeline of events about where Madison was, where Kaylee was, where Zana was, where Ethan was. But where it really gets interesting is the timeline of this. This is a lot later than we initially anticipated. So to give everybody an idea here, I'm going to pull this up. We actually thought that the murders might have happened earlier. According to police, they believe the murders happened between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. I think that is a bit later than we originally said. I'm going to read more from the affidavit. DM, again, one of the roommates who survived, who was on the ground floor, stated she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the southeast side of the second floor. DM stated she was awoken at approximately 4 a.m. by what she stated sounded like Kaylee Gonsalves, playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, which was located on the third floor. A short time later, DM said that she heard who she thought was Gonsalves say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." A review of records obtained from a forensic download of Kernodle's phone showed this could have also been Kernodle, as her cellular phone indicated she was likely awake and using the TikTok app at approximately 4:12 a.m. DM stated she looked out of her bedroom but did not see anything when she heard the comment about someone being in the house. DM stated she opened her door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Kernodle's room. DM then said that she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." At approximately 4:17 a.m., a security camera located at 112 King Road, a residence immediately to the northwest of 1122 King Road, picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. The security camera is less than 50 feet from the west wall of Kernodle's bedroom. By the way, I'm going to continue, but you can see more of the evidence that we didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. This is a more detailed timeline than any of us could have imagined. DM stated she opened her door for the third time. She heard crying and saw a figure clad in black, and I went through that already about seeing this. Now, they go on to say that the combination of DM's statements to law enforcement, reviews of forensic downloads of records from BF and DM's phone, and video of a suspect video as described below leads investigators to believe that the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Now, this is also important. This is about latent shoe prints. I'm going to read that part. During the processing of the crime scene, investigators found a latent shoe print. This was located during the second processing of the crime scene by the ISP forensic team by first using a presumptive blood test and then amino black. This is a protein strand that detects the presence of cellular material. The detected shoe print showed a diamond-shaped pattern similar to the pattern of a Vans-type shoe sole. This was just outside the door of DN's bedroom, located on the second floor. This is consistent with DM's statement regarding the suspect's path of travel. As part of the investigation, an extensive search, commonly referred to in law enforcement as a video canvass, was conducted in the area of the King Road residence. This video canvas was to obtain any footage from the early morning hours of November 13, 2022 in the area of the King Road residence and surrounding neighborhoods in an effort to locate the suspects or suspect vehicles traveling to or leaving from the King Road residence. This video canvas resulted in the collection of numerous surveillance videos in the area from both residential and business addresses. I have reviewed the numerous videos that were collected and have had conversations with other officers, and they go on to say that. A review of camera footage indicated, and this is where that white Hyundai Elantra comes into play. A review of camera footage indicated that a white sedan, hereafter suspect vehicle 1, was observed traveling westbound in the 700 block of Indian Hills Drive in Moscow at approximately 3:26 a.m. and westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 in Moscow at approximately 3:28 a.m. On this video, it appeared suspect vehicle 1 was not displaying a front license plate. At this point, they didn't know it was the vehicle that we now know, the white Hyundai Elantra. This is how they first were able to identify it. A review of footage from multiple videos obtained from the King Road neighborhood showed multiple sightings of suspect vehicle 1 starting at 3:29 a.m. and ending at 4:20 a.m. Remember the timeline of when they think these murders occurred. These sightings show suspect vehicle 1 makes an initial 3 passes by the 1122 King Road residence and then leave via Walenta Drive. Based off of my experience as a patrol officer, this is a residential neighborhood with a very limited number of vehicles that travel in the area during the early morning hours. Upon review of the video, there are only a few cars that enter and exit this area during this time frame. Again, this is also important because remember, he is charged with first-degree murder. There is a level of premeditation and planning to this. Keep this in mind as we hear all this. Suspect vehicle 1 can be seen entering the area a 4th time at approximately 4:04 a.m. It can be seen driving eastbound on King Road, stopping and turning around in front of 500 Queen Road, number 52, and then driving back westbound on King Road. When suspect vehicle 1 is in front of the King Road residence, it appeared to unsuccessfully attempt to park or turn around in the road. The vehicle then continued to the intersection of Queen Road and King Road, where it can be seen completing a 3-point turn and then driving eastbound again down Queen Road. Suspect vehicle 1 is next seen departing the area of the King Road residence at approximately 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed. Suspect vehicle 1 is next observed traveling southbound on Walenta Drive. Based on my knowledge of the area and review of camera footage in the neighborhood, that does not show suspect vehicle 1 during that time frame. I believe that suspect vehicle 1 likely exited the neighborhood at Palouse River Drive and Conestoga Drive, Pulaski River Drive is at the southern edge of Moscow and proceeds into Whitman County, Washington. Eventually, the road leads to Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington is approximately 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. Both Pullman and Moscow are small college towns, and people commonly travel back and forth between them. We've talked about this before when he was ultimately apprehended, the connection, the geographical distance between his university and where these murders occurred. I'm going to continue on. Law enforcement officers provided video footage of suspect vehicle 1 to forensic examiners with the FBI that regularly utilizes surveillance footage to identify the year, make, and model of these unknown vehicles. The forensics examiner, and they go into the forensics examiner's background and experience. After reviewing the numerous observations of suspect vehicle 1, the forensics examiner initially believed that suspect vehicle 1 was a 2011-2013 Hyundai Elantra, but upon further review, he indicated it could also be a 2011-2016 Hyundai Elantra. As a result, investigators have been reviewing information on persons in possession of a vehicle of this type. Investigators were given access to video footage on the Washington State University WSU campus. This is how they were able to connect the car to Kohberger. If we have some more time, I'd like to get into it before we take our break. So let me do this real quick. Okay, so we're not going to take breaks. I'm going to continue to go forward with this. A review of that video indicated that at approximately 2:44 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, a white sedan, which was consistent with the description of the white Hyundai Elantra known as suspect vehicle 1, was observed on WSU surveillance cameras traveling north on Southeast Nevada Street at Northeast Stadium Way. At approximately 2:53 a.m., this is again before the murders, a white sedan which is consistent with the description of the white Elantra, known as suspect vehicle 1, was observed traveling southeast on Nevada Street in Pullman, Washington, towards SR 270. SR 270 connects Pullman, Washington to Moscow, Idaho. The camera footage from Pullman, Washington was provided to the same FBI forensic examiner. The FBI forensic examiner identified the vehicle observed in Pullman, Washington as being a 2014-2016 Hyundai Elantra. At approximately 5:25 a.m., this is after the killings, a white sedan, which was consistent with the description of suspect vehicle 1, was observed on 5 cameras in Pullman, Washington, and on the WSU campus cameras. The first camera that recorded the white sedan was located at 1300 Johnson Road in Pullman. The white sedan was observed traveling northbound on Johnson Road. Johnson Road leads directly back to West Pulaski River Drive in Moscow, which intersects with Conestoga Drive. I mentioned those streets before. The white sedan was then observed turning north on Bishop Boulevard and northwest on SR 270. At approximately 5:27 a.m., the white Elantra was observed on cameras traveling northbound on Stadium Way at Nevada Street. They go on to talk a little bit more about where it goes. They provided a map showing what the campus looks like and kind of what the area looks like. They go on to say on November 25th, 2022, MPD, Moscow Police Department, asked area law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for white Hyundai Elantras on the area. On November 29th, 2022, at approximately 12:28 a.m., Washington State University police officer Daniel Tiengo queried white Elantras registered at WSU. As a result of that query, he located a 2015 white Elantra with a Pennsylvania license plate, LFZ 8649. This vehicle was registered to Bryan Kohberger, and he resides at 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment 201, Pullman, Washington. You have just seen how they were able to link the car to the defendant. The same day, at approximately 12:58 a.m., WSU officer Curtis Whitman was looking for white Hyundai Elantras and located a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra at 1630 Northeast Valley Road in Pullman in the parking lot. 1630 Northeast Valley Road is an apartment complex that houses WSU students. Officer Whitman also ran the car and returned it back to Kohberger with a Washington tag. This is where now you're going to see how they matched up the description from one of the roommates to the license. I reviewed Kohberger's Washington State driver license information and photograph. This license indicates that Kohberger is a white male with a height of 6 feet and weighs 185 pounds. Additionally, the photograph of Kohberger shows that he has bushy eyebrows, which again is what was indicated by one of the surviving roommates. Kohberger's physical description is consistent with the description of the male DM, the male that DM, again, the pseudonym used for one of the surviving roommates, saw inside the King Road residence on November 13th. Further investigation, including a review of Lake County Sheriff's Deputy CPL Duke's body cam and reports, showed that on August 21st, 2022, so this is months before this happened, Bryan Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop that occurred in Moscow, Idaho. This was by Corporal Duke. At the time, Kohberger, who was the sole occupant in the car, was driving a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plate LFZ 8649, the one I just mentioned. During the stop, which was recorded via a law enforcement body camera, Kohberger provided his phone number, and then they don't actually list the phone number, they redact that. Investigators conducted electronic database queries and learned that the phone number, the phone is a number issued by AT&T. Now, so from now on, his phone is going to be identified as 8458 phone, 8458 phone. On October 14th, 2022, again before the killings, Bryan Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop by a WSU police officer. Upon review of the body cam and report of the stop, Kohberger was the sole occupant and was driving, again, the white 2015 Hyundai Elantra. On November 18th, this is after the killings, according to Washington State licensing, Kohberger then registered the 2015 white Elantra with Washington, and it later received a new plate of CFB 8708. That's because the license was about to expire. Prior to this time, the 2015 Elantra was registered in Pennsylvania, which does not require a front license plate to be displayed. Based on my own experience in communication with Washington law enforcement, I know that Idaho and Washington require front and back license plates to be displayed. Investigators believe that Kohberger is still driving the 2015 white Elantra because his vehicle was captured on December 13, 2022 by a license plate reader in Loma, Colorado. Kohberger's Elantra was then queried on December 5th, 2022 by law enforcement in Hancock County, Indiana. On December 16th, at approximately 2:26 p.m., surveillance video showed Kohberger's Elantra in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. The sole occupant of the vehicle was a white male whose description was consistent with Kohberger. Kohberger has family in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Based on information provided on the WSU website, Kohberger, and I went through this already, where they went into his background and how he did that Reddit survey. Now let's go into the cell phone data. The cell phone data is always critical. So as part of this investigation, law enforcement obtained search warrants to determine cellular data devices that utilize cellular towers in close proximity to the King Road residence on November 13th, 2022 between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Anybody who follows the Law&Crime Network knows cell phone data can track someone's location in pivotal points at important times. So what did it show here? This is interesting. After determining that Kohberger was associated to both the 2015 white Elantra and the 8458 phone, investigators reviewed these search warrant returns. A query of the phone in these returns did not show the phone utilizing cellular tower resources in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. So the cell phone data doesn't show that he was there or was using that phone near the residence. But that is only part of the story. Based on my training experience and conversation with law enforcement officers that specialize in the utilization of cellular telephone records, individuals can either leave their cellular telephone at a different location before committing a crime or turn their cellular telephone off prior to going to a location to commit a crime. So let's talk about this right now. Sonny, I'll go to you real quick. I've gone through a lot right now. This idea of the cell phone, and I'm going to get into it in a second, that someone would turn their phone off, that even if you don't have a phone on to track somebody, turning the phone off can be evidence of guilt.
Yes, it absolutely can. Although these alleged suspect was clever in some aspects, not too clever, because technology was really, really playing a role in this arrest. Being able to document and I finally had an opportunity to look at everything, and you reading it was really wonderful for the audience who is not looking at it. They were able to connect the dots in such a way that a probable cause warrant was absolutely necessary to bring Bryan in for this investigation. It would make no sense for them not to move forward with a warrant. And because this guy was actually stopped so many times by law enforcement, it is unbelievable that while he appeared to be smart in some senses, where he was being calculated and thought he was asking the right questions and getting the details down, he was not that clever. Law enforcement and the officer and affiant in this particular document was really reaching out to use
Yeah.
all of the resources for law enforcement to connect the dots. It's powerful information.
And just to further that up, they go on to say that on the night of the murders, at approximately 2:42 a.m., that phone, they could detect that the phone left the residence where he was, and then it was turned off at approximately 2:47 a.m. It stops reporting to the network, which is consistent with either the phone being in an area without cellular coverage, or the network connection is disabled, or the phone is turned off. But then the phone comes back on at 4:48 a.m.
4:48.
And
Yes.
that's just so crucial. Joseph, I've gone through a lot right now. Tell me what you are taking away from, let's talk about the tracking of the car. I mean, that was central, and we knew about the car, but now we're getting more detail about how many times it was actually picked up on camera.
Yeah, and again, these are like electronic breadcrumbs. You know, we talked about the phone, but you know, you have to look at the CCTV footage as well as it's being tracked along. You can kind of get an idea of it. It at least implies purpose, doesn't it? You know, these movements as it goes along, and then kind of as an adjunct to that, we can think about it's identified multiple times around this particular area, going back to his home, showing up in an approximate area related to the crime itself. And then not to mention, and we haven't really dug into this yet, the 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 trip across America as well. I think that this is going to play a key role in this as well, as he's using this as a conveyance for he and his father along the way. This also brings into, you know, our production staff is showing this imagery right now. This also brings into question, I think, from a broader sense, the purpose of these stops that took place in Indiana. A good friend of mine had identified these stops in a term that not many people have heard before. It's called a whisper stop, and the purpose is that many times that the feds are onto you, they're not going to be purposed to pull you over, but they will wink and a nod, ask the locals to pull you over. And they're doing any number of things to assess this environment. A lot of people have made comments about, oh, did they observe any kind of injuries, you know, in the
Yeah.
freeze frames that they had on his arms? Also, you're looking for the reaction of the subject in the car. Is he going to bolt on you? All those sorts of things. So the feds probably put a bug into the ear of both the state police in Indiana and also the locals to do these stops. And Jesse, I got to tell you, the stops were real close together. They're intensely focused on this guy, and it all goes back to the tracking this vehicle back in Washington and Idaho.
And we know that there was reporting by Fox News that the FBI asked Indiana State Police to stop him in order to see his hands. I'm going to take some viewer questions right now from Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Bring your questions in right now. I have two experts with me. I have the probable cause affidavit with me. We are reacting in real time to this. I want to go to Resistance Miss on Twitter. Sonny, I'll go to you for this question. So this person identifies the name of the surviving roommate. I won't do it. I'll just say DM. So DM saw a masked intruder in all black, heard someone crying and a thud on the floor. Why the heck did she not call 911? Why did she lock herself in her room and not come out until almost noon later that day? I'm sorry, but something isn't adding up. Remember, that 911 phone call wasn't placed, as this viewer is correct, until almost noon the next day. We haven't heard the 911 phone call. What are your initial response to that?
Always think they know what they would do in a situation. And until you're in that situation, you actually don't know what you would do. You don't know the individual's DM state of mind, whether DM may have been intoxicated, whether DM has a history of sleepwalking, or just absolute fear and not knowing what was going on. So I won't really hold anything against the other individuals in the home because we don't know what exactly has happened with them, what they were doing. But the information and the fact that that law enforcement was able to gather these details, get a description is critical. But no one ever knows what they'll do in a particular situation. And these are young people, uh, and you just don't know.
Yeah, and again, one of the most shocking things, and you could see at a potential trial how important the testimony of DM will be. Her physical description of this person is consistent with Bryan Kohberger. And as I read through the affidavit, when they looked at his driver's license, what did they notice? The bushy eyebrows, which she described. Joseph, I want to go to you. Gyps on YouTube. A lot is being said about the murder weapon and not being found, but how much does that really matter? Again, I'll preface this two ways. If you're just joining us, I mentioned earlier, DNA was taken from the sheath of a knife case that, as we talked about before, that was tan. It had a USMC, United States Marine Corps, on it, K-bar. This is something that we had anticipated. We talked about here on Law and Crime, and also that the DNA from that presumably matched up to Kohberger, or it seems like it was used. I am of the opinion that it is important for a prosecution. I've seen cases where you can successfully prosecute somebody without a murder weapon, but it is an impediment. Do you agree?
It can be, but let me explain to you the beauty of this, okay? The fact that they have the sheath. This is what's going to happen. They're going to reach out to the manufacturer of this knife, and they're going to get similar knives that marry up to this sheath, and they're going to run tests. And that's going to be very important too. And here's something else that people might not know that we do in the morgue. When it comes time to autopsy, one of the things that we do before we autopsy a body is we actually do full body x-rays in many cases. I suspect that happened with these blades many, many times. What occurs is that you get chips off of the blade edge itself, and sometimes the tip will break off. If that happens, you've captured a signature of that blade at kind of a chemical level, because if they can recover that bit of metal at autopsy, they can do a metallurgical testing on that and see if it marries up to the manufacturer. You know, this is their common way that they create these blades, and also they're going to test these blades to see if, or examine them to see if they marry up with the wounds that the forensic pathologist saw at autopsy at that particular time. So it's not as urgent as it would be in other cases, because it all comes down to the fact that they found this sheath. That is so big, Jesse, in this case, I can't explain it to you.
Sonny, I'm going to go to from Handsome Hensley on Twitter. Was he seen at the frat party that two of the victims were seen at? Nothing in this probable cause affidavit I haven't seen that would suggest that. It does raise the question, and Sonny, I'll pose this question to you instead. What did we not get from the affidavit? We didn't get the why. We still do not understand why he did this, why he allegedly did this. We understand how they tracked him. I mean, I'll tell you, the evidence is very strong, purely based on the probable cause affidavit. It's a long time between now and a prosecution and a trial, but there's no indication his interest in them, his connection to them, other than that one comment I made at the beginning of the affidavit. According to, I believe it was DM or one of the roommates who was on the first floor, she heard a voice say, and I want to pull this up, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Presuming that is him, we still don't understand why, Sonny.
Right. And I agree. We don't understand why. And the other thing that's very interesting that's not in the affidavit is also, had he been in the residence before? How did he know who and where to go, where they were, and what does that look like? How did he know how to move around the room? So, move around the location and move about without the detection. What about the dog? Had he been nearby? But we are crystal clear that this individual has been in the area, was potentially stalking these individuals, and had presence of mind to turn off the cell phone. And as my colleague just said, the knife and the weapon are really important. So all of those things matter. We don't know the why yet, but this is really just another chapter in a very long book, in a very long story. And there's still so much to unpack, so much to learn about this individual, and they can trace back purchases from long time ago from family
Yep.
members to find out about whether a knife was ever purchased. Anyone in the Marines, why that particular knife? Do they use that for hunting? There's so many things here, but it was very important to make the arrest.
So,
That is the critical thing that we must focus on. They had a suspect. They did their investigation. This is just the beginning of the investigation. And Jesse, you said we have not heard the 911 call yet.
right.
So we don't know what DM said.
And again, you don't need motive or the why necessarily for a successful prosecution. We all want to know what the why would be. And of course, the question is, based on DM's account, which was reiterated to law enforcement, why did the suspect not kill her? Why did she survive? That's the million-dollar question right there. So let me ask you this, Joseph, I go to you. Lumberjack on YouTube, did they have to search, did they have a search warrant or a court order to get the DNA ancestry? Based on my quick review of this affidavit, and we have producers going through it as well, I haven't seen anything about a court order or a warrant for this. As I mentioned before, what they did was they got that DNA that they were able to obtain off of the knife sheath and off of trash that he had. I'm going to repeat that paragraph one more time. On December 27th, Pennsylvania agents recovered the trash from the Kohberger family residence in Pennsylvania. That evidence was sent to the Idaho State Lab, and they reported a DNA profile obtained from the trash and DNA and they were able to obtain a DNA profile from the trash and from the knife sheath, and identified a male as not being excluded as the biological father of suspect profile. So, Joseph, what had to go into them being able to do that?
Well, I think that whatever service they used, you know, from a legal standpoint, again, you're the attorney, Jesse, but I think that from a documentary standpoint, it would be important to have that warrant in place. However, there are a couple of these companies out there that kind of have standing agreements with police agencies, and particularly at a federal and state level, where if they need something, they'll make it happen. And that might be the case. They said, look, we have a sample here. We want to compare it against the database that you have. And that's when the complexity starts, because as you're doing it, you have to build out these trees. We're going to find out more about.
We have a question from Caitlin from YouTube. And by the way, Joseph and Sonny, excellent analysis as we break this down in real time. Caitlin from YouTube asks, can you explain more what the gag means after the affidavit with no new information being released? So let me just clarify that. The judge did issue a gag order. That means investigators, law enforcement personnel, attorneys, they can no longer speak about this case unless something changes. Now, if you'll recall, Bill Thompson, who is the Latah County prosecutor, indicated that if you wanted more information about this case, you're going to have to follow the court docket. You're going to have to follow the court record. That is why information like this from the affidavit is going to be so important. We are all going to be reading this in real time. That is where we're going to get our information about this case as it ultimately progresses. And honestly, I think that that is probably the right move. Sonny, you might agree with me, considering the miscommunication that we had at the beginning of this case, including from Bill Thompson, about whether or not the house was targeted or the individuals were targeted. Now that we know more information about what one of the surviving victims saw, makes me understand maybe why there was confusion about the target of these killings. I think the gag order was great in the sense that, I mean, from my perspective, would it be great to be able to speak with members of law enforcement, attorneys? Sure. But in order to maintain the sanctity of this investigation in a case, it's probably the right move. Sonny, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. You know, the public wants all of the answers and people want all of the information right now, but it is very important. Most of the time when people think about crime scenes and they think about these type of cases, they start at the law enforcement physical presence on the scene. But law enforcement really gets into this investigation from a point that we have discussed but haven't discussed, and that is with the initial 911 call. People forget that the dispatchers are part of the law enforcement presence. So, from the very time that the call was placed, that is when this investigation begins. And we have to be clear and remember that we're getting this information, but now also the defense has it. And they are going to be preparing. And it is really important to not start speaking about things, but actually to get quiet and let those that do what they do it well, because doing things fast is not as important as getting things right. And right now,
Yep.
it's important not for the public as much as it is for the family of Kaylee and Madison and Zaina and Ethan to know that justice is working in a process that will hopefully secure them, not justice in the sense that they will ever forget, but ensuring that whoever is guilty of this crime is no longer out and about to commit it again.
And just to reiterate something, because we're learning so much information about this, whether it was the latent shoe print, whether it was the DNA, whether it was the almost positive identification by one of the victims in one of the roommates in the house, I still have to go back to the cell phone towers. I think it's so fascinating that their review of the cell towers and records that Kohberger's phone did not ping in the area on November 13th between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Again, our indication based on this affidavit is that the killings happened later than we thought, towards in the 4 a.m. hour. But something you would say, oh, that would be for the defense to work with. You know, the prosecutors, they don't have cell phone evidence, but the individual, the officer who wrote this affidavit says that people can leave their cell phones or turn them off before committing a crime. And as I mentioned, that phone associated with Kohberger left his residence and was turned off at, I think, if I recall, 2:47 a.m. based on this affidavit, and then was turned back on at 4:48. I say turn off, turn on. It could be a lost service. It could have been disabled from the network. Could have been turned off. But the fact that it stops working, or it stops processing information at 2:47 and then comes back on at 4:48, that in and of itself could be a case for the prosecutors to make. I want to keep going forward with some more questions that we have here. Joseph, I'll throw this one to you. This is from Fernanda Volcanis on YouTube. After Bryan Kohberger arrives in Idaho, which he has, what will be the police's job on the case?
Well, at that point in time, you want to keep him, secured. Obviously, that's going to be part and parcel of this. And I would imagine if they haven't done it already, they may have done this in Pennsylvania. They are going to request from him some type of biological sample. And generally, that's going to consist of them doing a buccal mucosal swab or a cheek scraping. Some people refer to it as that, to collect it from the specific source. And so they're going to go back as a confirmatory at that point in time to, kind of shore things up. Here's one more piece to this that we have to keep in mind. There's a whole bounty of evidence that has yet to come forward. And, one of the things I'm very interested in as a forensic science guy is that car. Because in my opinion, that car did not make it back to Idaho. More than likely, either working with Pennsylvania State Police or the FBI, that vehicle would have gone or has gone to an evidence processing location that has a garage, Jesse. And right now, they are taking this thing apart from stem to stern. Trust me on this. And they are going through that car, because I have contended all along that this car, obviously it's going to have Kohberger's DNA in it. You would expect that to be there. But if they get in that car and they find any DNA that's associated with these poor kids that were slaughtered in that house, this is important. My contention has been is that car is a rolling crime scene in and of itself. And it has to be handled with kid gloves at this point. So they're going to take this thing apart piece by piece, and they're going to use every kind of technology that you can imagine on this thing, everything from alternative lighting to luminol or blue star or whatever they're using. They're going to take samples from all inside of this thing. The headliner's coming out, the seats are coming out, everything, the gear lever. They're going to take a look at the carpet, the substrata beneath the carpet, everything, because it doesn't matter how hard you try to clean one of these things, you are not going to escape what we're capable of doing in forensics and recovering molecular evidence.
And
That's
so
right.
much of this affidavit is based on the car, is based on cameras capturing the car, seeing who it
Yeah.
was registered to, seeing the movements of the car, having it track back to
Yeah.
key locations of Bryan Kohberger. I agree with you. That could be a rolling crime scene. Obviously, my concern would be it wasn't like they picked the car up the next day. It's been out for a while. Obviously, there could be problems there.
Okay.
And Joseph,
Okay.
you want to
Yeah,
jump
I
on that
agree.
real quick?
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. However, the thing about it is this: if if we're thinking perhaps if this car in fact was used as the conveyance to take him back to Pullman after those alleged events that night, there's a high probability, given the intimate nature of these killings, that he would have been
Yeah.
super saturated with
Yeah.
evidence, and that is going to transfer into the fabric, just the fabric
Yes.
alone. That's the only part I'm considering right now, not to mention all these points of contact. There's no way, there's a lot of stuff that will be kind of protected in this environment, and all it takes is to draw just a bit of DNA that's connected back to these victims. How's the defense going to explain that away? How do you explain, you might be able to do it with one person, but if you get a collection of 4 individuals that you've never met or they've never crossed paths, how do you explain that away inside the interior of that vehicle, particularly if it's evidence-rich blood evidence? That's the richest DNA that we can get.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, really, when you break it down in terms of what that car has really become one of the most central focus of this case. I want to go now to you, Sonny. We have a question from Katrina McClough from Facebook. Is it possible that he intended to kill everyone in the house? Again, he's innocent until proven guilty, of course, but assuming it's him. What complicates that question is the account from DM that she
Right.
came face to face with him and he walked right by her and she froze.
Yeah. Well, there could have been many reasons why that happened. Maybe he realized he was short on time. He didn't have enough time. He didn't want anyone to scream. It would have caused more confusion. Uh, the fact that she didn't scream actually might have saved her life, that she didn't have the type of response that would have triggered him to continue to do something else. We don't know currently, based on the affidavit, how the individuals were killed, who was killed first. We can only speculate. So we're not sure exactly where the alleged perpetrator, and as you are always pointing out, Jesse, we're not sure. Okay, we can only speculate and say this, how this all unfolded. But having someone in custody with all of these things and all of the facts is really crucial. And as my colleague just talked about the DNA and the car, I think it's also with the FBI in Pennsylvania. I think they are really taking every single thing apart. And when there's a part in the affidavit that talked about the latent footprint, I believe.
Let me read that real quick, and
Latent
let me
footprint.
read that to you and get it to you because
Okay.
I think that was important as well. So during the processing of the crime scene, investigators found a latent shoe print. This was located during the second processing of the crime scene by the ISP forensic team by first using a presumptive blood test and then amino black, a protein stain that detects the presence of cellular material. The detected shoe print showed a diamond-shaped pattern similar to the pattern of a Vans-type shoe sole just outside the door of DM's bedroom, which was located on the second floor. Again, DM is the roommate who said she came face-to-face with the person in the house. This is consistent with DM's statement regarding the suspect's path of travel. I throw it back to you, Sonny.
So that is where my colleague Joseph, where he talked about that DNA and the carpet and having that small, unless Bryan actually removed the carpet, and then still that might not be enough. That is critical evidence that you cannot clean up, that you cannot remove, and I think that gets us closer. DM may have been saved by the fact that he might not have been running out of time, might have been out of breath. A whole lot of things
Yeah.
could have happened that saved her and the other roommate that we haven't talked about that was present in there. And people say, well, it took so long to call. You don't know until you're there and
Correct.
you're in that moment.
We have an interesting question about the actual affidavit. The question was there a camera inside or on the outside of the King Road residence that picked up whimpering and a thud? This is from Chelsea Lee Copeland. That is correct. I'm going to read this to you. At approximately 4:17 a.m., critical time when we think this was happening, a security camera located at 1112 King Road, which is a residence immediately to the northwest of 1122 King Road, picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. The security camera is less than 50 feet from the west wall of Kernodle's bedroom. So that kind of answers that one for you right there. There's another question from Castillo Vane. Is the 911 phone call going to be released now? That can media get it released because DM not calling police right away isn't making sense. I get she was scared for 8 hours later, but it is a bit confusing. Sonny, you've spoken about it. Joseph, I'll throw that question to you about the 911 phone call.
I'd be very surprised if it was. Now that this gag order is in place,
Right.
that piece of evidence, and it is a piece of evidence, trust me, it's everything at this point in time, because first off, it starts the time, it starts, as Sonny had mentioned, it starts the clock ticking as far as getting law enforcement involved. And also one other thing I want to point out, it also gives us a place in time to start relative to our forensics regarding postmortem interval. How long had these victims been deceased at that point in time? There's so much tied into that 9/11 call that I cannot imagine under any circumstances they would release it. This is something I think they'll protect.
I want to go to you, Sonny, because this is interesting too. In the affidavit, I mentioned them tracking the cell phone towers and the cell phone records of Bryan Kohberger's phone. They wanted to see if he was stalking the victims ahead of time. And at least 12 prior occasions prior to November 13th, his phone was in the area of the residence. All of these occasions, except for one, occurred in the late evening and early morning hours. For me, that signals premeditation and planning and why he's being charged with first-degree murder.
I absolutely agree. I noticed that, and I actually have my affidavit, the hard copy, that I actually have it on that page. That and I was looking at it. It looks like he was stalking them, because that's a lot of contact in an area, or presence in an area, one that you don't live in, and the times of day are very unique. So I think the law enforcement and the prosecution can take that information in addition to when the cell phone information is available for the individuals, for the victims in the home. Were they there at those particular times? And to see what type of correlation it was, because we don't yet know the potential relationship between the victims and the alleged perpetrator, or if there was any previous contact. It's kind of hard to say, but it looks like stalking to me based on what is going on here, and that these young ladies and this gentleman, the victims, were not completely aware or didn't have presence of mind to, really stay focused on their safety at that time. So it's probably nothing that triggered them to feel so afraid of him if they knew who he was.
So Joseph, this kind of leads into this next question we have from one and only Woody from YouTube. Do you think anyone else had anything to do with this in helping him? Because it seems you had 4 victims. Nothing in this affidavit suggests that there was another person in that house, but someone helping him before or after. Your experience, what do you think?
Well, I think that let's unpack this a little bit, because I think that we have to rely upon an earlier statement that was made by the chief. I think that the chief had actually stated that this was, in fact, their person of interest. I think that's significant. Also, back to what Sonny said earlier, and this is something, I'm not saying that it actually happened. However, it must be considered. Was he nesting somewhere in that home? Had he visited it somewhere before? Had he been through closets? Had he set up a hide somewhere in there just to watch the movements where these kids would not have expected it? How familiar was he with this environment? Because we've got 4 sets of victims in 2 separate locations. And I think that we can all agree that the vigor that is required to take these lives, particularly with a
Right.
sharp force weapon. We're not talking about shooting somebody. Would have been quite exhausting. So was there a pause somewhere in there, and then continued on with the homicides at this point? Maybe going again to Sonny's point, when he was exiting this residence, allegedly seen by this the DM person, um, maybe he didn't have the energy at that point in
Right.
time. This would have
Yep.
been an overwhelmingly exerting uh, physical activity he would have been engaged in, just slaughtering these people. Adrenaline is up. There would have been muscle fatigue at this point. He would have been spent essentially by this point in time. So I think that they're considering all of this, a deep dive into the fiber and molecular evidence contained in that Moscow residence is going to be required, and they're going to have to look through every area of that house to see if maybe he had been there before, because they can find, in fact, touch DNA in those locations.
That
I'd be very curious to find out if they're going to be searching through closets, all these places where he could have hidden.
And in a way, it's really the start, right? We ended one
Yeah, oh
chapter, we're
yeah.
beginning another, and these are the questions that we're seeing. Joseph, Sonny, thank you so much for coming on, spending the last hour with me as we break down this probable cause affidavit and new details in real time. We're going to continue to cover this case. We're going to continue to provide updates on the hearing that's happening in Idaho. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. Michelle Yu is up next. We'll be back.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Yu and welcome to the Law and Crime Trial Network. Today we are laser focused on accused University of Idaho murderer Bryan Kohberger and his first official court appearance. The 28-year-old was arrested last Friday and accused of killing the 4 university students in the early morning hours of November 13th. Now, in the most recent development, we received the affidavit a little while ago, and it is filled with just jaw-dropping information, including that one of the surviving roommates who saw the suspect in the off-campus house the morning of the murders. To start the show, I want to give you some of the most important information from that probable cause affidavit. The roommates with the initials DM and BF stated occupants of the home were home by 2 a.m. and asleep or in their rooms by 4 a.m. Now, Kernodle, one of the victims, received a DoorDash order at the residence at approximately 4 a.m. DM stated that she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the 2nd floor. She was awoken at 4 a.m. Now, she, though, thought that Goncalves, one of the other victims, was playing with her dog. Then a short time later, DM said she heard who she thought was Goncalves say something to the effect that there's someone here. Now, DM then thought she heard crying. She heard a male voice saying something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And I will stop there and briefly introduce to you my legal panel with me today to discuss all this and break it all down. Trial attorney Catherine Smith and criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matthew Mangino are here. Thank you both so much for joining us and breaking down this case. And I'll start with you, Catherine. There's so much more new information coming in right now. What draws your attention the most, especially with this new surviving roommate?
There's just a treasure trove of information, Michelle. We have not only forensic information, but we have so much information from these witnesses that corroborate really the identification of the suspect, or now the soon-to-be criminal defendant. In fact, some of the specific identifying information, his eyebrows, there were things that really one after another point very definitively at this defendant.
Well, that's exactly right, Catherine. The eyebrows. I mean, when they asked this, when the surviving roommate discussed, the description of the suspect, she said about 5'10", 6 foot is apparently what's on his driver's license, and the bushy eyebrows. That is what is making a match here between the witness and what we're hearing. Matt, what do you think?
Well, I was surprised, Michelle, really by the detail in this affidavit of probable cause. As you look through it, it's 16 pages in length. As a former prosecutor, I always believed that less was more. Certainly, you have to establish.
Matt, I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I'm getting word now that we're going to go into that hearing and see the latest right now. So let's check this out.
All right.
Please be seated. We are on the record in the 2nd Judicial District, Latah County. This is the Magistrates Division of District Court. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger, cause number CR 29222805. Mr. Kohberger is present in court. He is in custody. He is appearing with his attorney, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings, on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for initial appearance. Mr. Kohberger, I am going to advise you of the rights that you have in this case. I am going to go over the criminal complaint with you, and then we're going to discuss setting the matter for further hearing. You have the following rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to the presumption of innocence. That means the state bears the burden to prove that you are guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to a preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing is a probable cause hearing. At that hearing, the state must establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. You have a right to have that hearing within 14 days if you remain in custody. If you are bound over at that preliminary hearing to district court, if the court finds probable cause, you would be bound over to district court. And at that time, you can enter a plea of not guilty, and you can have a jury trial set within 6 months of your appearance in district court. At both your preliminary hearing and your jury trial, you have the right to confront and question any evidence or witnesses called against you. Call witnesses on your own behalf and compel witnesses to be present and testify at the state's expense. You have the right to be represented by a lawyer. If you cannot afford one could be appointed to represent you based upon your financial need. You also have the right to appeal any conviction in your case. Do you understand these rights?
Yes.
I am now going to go over the criminal complaint with you. Count 1 of the criminal complaint charges you with the felony offense of burglary. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder in violation of Idaho Code 18-1401 and 1403. The maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is not less than 1 year in prison, no more than 10 years in prison, and or a $50,000 fine or both. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 2 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 3 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Gonsalves, a human being, by stabbing Kaylee Gonsalves, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 4 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Xana Kernodle, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 5 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died, in violation of Idaho Codes 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. And again, the maximum penalty for this offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohberger, would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?
I have court-appointed counsel.
Court has reviewed your application for attorney at public expense. I do find that you are indigent and do qualify for court-appointed counsel. I will appoint Ms. Taylor to represent you in this case. Ms. Taylor, have you had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Kohberger about speedy preliminary hearing and setting this matter?
Your Honor, I have. We would ask the court to set a status hearing in a week or two to make a final determination.
Okay. And Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings are in agreement with that.
That's fine with the state, Your Honor.
I will go ahead and set this matter for a status hearing then on the calendar on January 12th at 10 o'clock a.m. We will make sure notice is sent, and then Ms. Taylor, do you wish to argue bail at this time?
Your Honor, I would like to ask the court to consider setting a bond. Mr. Kohberger right now is on a no bond hold, but it's a limited request as I don't have enough information. We are new to the case. We haven't reviewed very much in the way of information about the case, and we have just done our own work on the case. But we would want the court to know that Mr. Kohberger has a good family that stands behind him.
And Mr. Thompson.
The state's position is that Mr. Kohberger is not entitled to bond in this case. We can take charges as is noted on the arrest warrant itself. Idaho Code 19-816, 19-2903 both specify that given the potential penalties in this case, there's no right to bail. The defendant was arrested 3,000 miles away across the country, where his family is. We ask that he remain in custody. No bail.
At this point in time, pursuant to Idaho Criminal Law 46B and Idaho Code 19-816 and 2903, I am going to leave the bail set of this case as no bail at this point in time until I have additional or further information at a later date and time. So with that, then Mr. Kohberger, you will be remanded in custody and remain in custody on the no bail pending further proceedings in this matter. Is there anything further in the case then for today, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, Your Honor. The state is asking for no contact orders for various family members of the deceased and also for the surviving roommates. I've spoken briefly with Ms. Taylor. She indicated there's no objection.
And Ms. Taylor, is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
So I will go ahead and issue those no contact orders. So I do have a no contact order then for the named individual of Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk, as well as the family members and Mr. Chapin, the family members of Ms. Kernodle, Mr. and Ms. Laramie, Mr. Mogan, Ms. Cheeley, and then a number of members of the Gonsalves family. Those specific names will certainly be provided to you, Mr. Kohberger, by way of being provided notice of these documents. You'll get a copy of these no contact orders. What you do need to be advised of and what will be in this no contact order is you are prohibited from having any contact with them whatsoever. You cannot contact them through a third person in writing or by any electronic means. You cannot Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, use the phone to communicate with them or otherwise any form of communication in direct or indirectly with them. You cannot engage in any conduct that would harass, stalk, threaten, use, attempt to use, or threaten to use any physical force or violence upon them, or place them in reasonable fear of bodily injury. You cannot go within or knowingly remain within 300 feet of their person or their home, workplace, or any other place where they might be. There are no exceptions to these orders. And if you do violate these orders, it is a new misdemeanor offense. It is punishable by up to a year in jail and or a $1,000 fine or both. At this point in time, due to being in the magistrate's division here, at this juncture, I am going to issue the no contact orders for a period of 2 years, and then if it needs to be modified or changed by additional judge, it can be done so at that time. Is there anything further, Mr. Thompson?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further, Ms. Taylor?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.
All right, there you have it. Your first look at Bryan Kohberger making his first court appearance in Idaho there. And there's a lot to absorb here. And Matt, I'm going to start with you there. We saw him in court looking cool as a cucumber, not looking at all remorseful.
Well, no, he was calm. He was sort of under control, not expressing any emotion. I wouldn't expect that at a preliminary arraignment the defendant would necessarily be emotional. He's had an opportunity to consult with counsel. I'm certainly counsel doesn't want him to express any sort of emotions or any sort of outward manifestations of what he's thinking or how he's reacting. So this is really the very first step in this process when he's alerted as to the charges against him. And there will be a status conference, but ultimately a preliminary hearing, at which time the state of Idaho will have to provide probable cause, more likely than not, that a crime has been committed. And we know a crime has been committed, but that he, in all likelihood, is the person who committed that crime.
Yeah, and in case you're just joining us here, a big day in this case involving Bryan Kohberger. The affidavit was released earlier. We're going to get into that later. And of course, you just saw the hearing, his first court appearance that happened a little earlier this afternoon. We're going to talk more about this case in a moment. We have to take a quick break, but more to come here on this Idaho case. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We are focusing on the University of Idaho murder case today as defendant Bryan Kohberger had his first official court appearance earlier. Now, the 28-year-old Washington State grad student was arrested last Friday and accused of killing the 4 University of Idaho students. We are reading some of the most important aspects of the probable cause affidavit here. At approximately 4:17 a.m., security camera at a residence northwest of the home picked up a distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times at 4:17 a.m. A camera outside is less than 50 feet from Kernodle's home. Kernodle's one of the victims. DM, who was one of the surviving roommates, stated she opened her door a third time after she heard crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. She described him as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletic, and had bushy eyebrows. Now, DM stated the masked male walked past her. She stood in, quote, frozen shock phase, end quote. The male walked towards the back sliding glass door. DM locked herself in her room, and investigators believe the murderer left the scene. Now, review of multiple videos obtained showed multiple sightings of the suspect vehicle starting at around 3:29 and ending at 4:20 a.m. And with that, I want to bring back my legal panel to discuss all these new developments. Katie, we talked about and touched upon this DM, one of the surviving roommates. Very important information we are receiving here, but so many questions as well as we are learning so much more information. A lot of questions. One of the questions people are asking is, why didn't she call the police after she saw him? But instead she ran into her room and hid and then did it the day after. What can be explained here?
You know, we can't really tell what motivates people in a moment, especially one of great fear, to act in the manner that they did. I don't think that that in any way implicates this person. I mean, certainly we don't have any evidence of that. And I try not to, from a legal and also a personal perspective, judge how people act within the context of trauma. Who knows what had gone on at that place before, or what she thought may have been consensual activity, or maybe she was just way too afraid and was in denial. But I don't think any of this points to certainly her involvement.
Well, not her involvement, but Matt, you know, you were speaking before you were interrupted when we went into the hearing about the match here, talking about the description of the suspect, which is about 5'10", 6 foot, not athletic, but not muscular rather, but he had bushy eyebrows, which is something that we see Bryan Kohberger has. When you put these two together, what does that make you think?
Well, I think that it certainly explains why he became a suspect in this case as the pieces began to fall together. I mean, having an identification of an unknown male in your apartment the night of these murders is extremely important. Obviously, that's the person who's responsible for these killings, or some of these killings. The interesting thing to me is, she says that she froze there and he walked by her. Now, this was a defendant allegedly who killed 4 people. Did he not notice her? Would he not? Why would he leave her behind if he saw her, if he walked past her during these early morning hours? I mean, there are so many questions here as we begin to analyze the evidence in this case. And clearly, they've provided an abundance of evidence. This affidavit of probable cause is 16 pages long. That's unusual. As a prosecutor in the past, I would want an affidavit of probable cause to be very concise and to limit the information that I made available in that, only enough for probable cause to get a warrant, and only enough evidence at a preliminary hearing to get that case bound to trial. Here we have kind of a treasure trove of evidence that was used to point the finger at this defendant.
It was indeed a very lengthy affidavit, and let's continue on some of the important aspects of the affidavit here. Suspect vehicle is seen departing the area of the residence approximately 4:20 a.m. at a high rate speed. And officers provided video footage of a vehicle to forensic examiners and FBI. After review, the forensic examiner initially believed the vehicle was a 2011-2013 Hyundai Elantra. Upon further review, said it was also could be 2011 to 2016. Now, investigators were given access to video footage on the WSU campus in Pullman, Washington, and a review of that video indicated that at approximately 2:44 a.m. on November 13th, a white sedan was observed on WSU surveillance cameras. At approximately 2:53 a.m., was traveling toward Moscow. Now, approximately 5:25 a.m., the white sedan, consistent with the suspect vehicle, was observed on 5 cameras in Pullman, Washington, and WSU campus cameras. Now, with that being said, also, the cell phone data is also something discussed here. According to TMZ, they said since June 22nd, the cell phone records show that he was in the area 12 times around the house, lurking around the evening times. When you hear that, Katie, what comes to mind?
Well, it starts to fill in the blanks of what we all would want to know, which is why. We have a daisy chain of factual information that peripherally points to him. There's nothing conclusive at this point that says, guess what, this is definitely this guy, in part because we can only get part facial recognition or identification because of his concealed face. So now we have the vehicle, which helps to link him, and then that loose end that's not necessary for a prosecution, but also so important for a jury, is the why. And if we can establish, or someone can establish, that he was stalking these people or had a relationship with these people in some way, that is very helpful to put all this connective tissue together.
Yeah, there's just a lot more questions that need to be answered after seeing this lengthy 16-page affidavit. All right, we're going to break this more down in a moment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching Law and Crime.
Would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?
I have court-appointed counsel.
And welcome back. We are continuing to read the affidavit from this case here. As you just saw, the first court appearance by Bryan Kohberger that happened early this afternoon. Getting back to that affidavit here, Kohberger's physical description is consistent with the description of the male DM saw inside the residence on November 13th. Now, if you're just joining us, DM is the initials of one of the surviving roommates that we're talking about. And keep this channel clear for affidavit here, because we are talking about what has the lengthy affidavit, what is showing there, and there is a lot to talk about here. And one of the things that we are discussing is the knife sheath that is in this affidavit. And I'm going to bring in my legal panel of Katie Smith and Matt Mangino here. The knife sheath was found in that Idaho house, and it had his DNA. And what they did was they went to the father's house of Bryan Kohberger, rummaged through his garbage, and matched that DNA to him. That is the link here. Matt, when you see this match here, I mean, something must stand out to you.
Well, yes, you have this sheath that, as I understand it, there was DNA, a DNA profile taken from the button or the snap of the sheath. And then that DNA was later matched with DNA that was retrieved from the garbage at the suspect's father's home in Pennsylvania. You know, my question would be, obviously, if I put my defense hat on, is what type of DNA was this? Was this blood? Was it touch DNA? This sheath, how large was this sheath? Does this sheath, was it able to carry a knife that was big enough to do the type of damage that was done to these individuals? And then it sort of begs the question, if it's not, was there some contact or relationship between the defendant and these victims, or one of these victims? I mean, so to me, this opens up a lot of questions. You know, it's a small part of this affidavit. At the very beginning of the affidavit, it talks about the sheath. At the very end, it talks about the garbage. But when in the totality of this affidavit of probable cause, it takes up very little space of the 16 pages of evidence that's been presented.
Well, Katie, where does this knife sheath DNA rank among evidence?
That's a very important point that he just brought up. This is not really a marquee element of this PC affidavit. This is sort of a sliding mention, which shows us why they doubled down on other information. It's because it's not the smoking gun. It certainly is very helpful, but any criminal defense attorney worth their salt could poke holes in this from now till Sunday, establishing that there was other contacts, that it didn't fit the weapon that was actually used in the murders. So this is another part of the important daisy chain to connect everything to the defendant. But I anticipate that there will be more to come, and certainly we will get more conclusive information about DNA.
Well, in case you're just joining us right now, Bryan Kohberger made his first court appearance today in Idaho, and we're going to show you that right now.
Oh, we took care of it. You get it. All right.
Please be seated. We are on the record in the 2nd Judicial District, Latah County. This is the Magistrate's Division of District Court. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger, cause number CR 29222805. Mr. Kohberger is present in court. He is in custody. He is appearing with his attorney, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings, on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for initial appearance. Mr. Kohberger, I am going to advise you of the rights that you have in this case. I am going to go over the criminal complaint with you, and then we're going to discuss setting the matter for further hearing. You have the following rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to the presumption of innocence. That means the state bears the burden to prove that you are guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to a preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing is a probable cause hearing. At that hearing, the state must establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed, and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. You have a right to have that hearing within 14 days if you remain in custody. If you are bound over at that preliminary hearing to district court, if the court finds probable cause, you would be bound over to district court. And at that time, you can enter a plea of not guilty, and you can have a jury trial set within 6 months of your appearance in district court. At both your preliminary hearing and your jury trial, you have the right to confront and question any evidence or witnesses called against you. Call witnesses on your own behalf, and compel witnesses to be present and testify at the state's expense. You have the right to be represented by a lawyer. If you cannot afford one could be appointed to represent you based upon your financial need. You also have the right to appeal any conviction in your case. Do you understand these rights?
Yes.
I am now going to go over the criminal complaint with you. Count 1 of the criminal complaint charges you with the felony offense of burglary. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder, in violation of Idaho Code 18-1401 and 1403. The maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is not less than 1 year in prison, no more than 10 years in prison, and or a $50,000 fine or both. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 2 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogan, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 3 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Gonsalves, a human being, by stabbing Kaylee Gonsalves, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 4 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Xana Kernodle, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 5 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died, in violation of Idaho Codes 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. And again, the maximum penalty for this offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohberger, would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?
I have court-appointed counsel.
Court has reviewed your application for attorney at public expense. I do find that you are indigent and do qualify for court-appointed counsel. I will appoint Ms. Taylor to represent you in this case. Ms. Taylor, have you had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Kohberger about speedy preliminary hearing and setting this matter?
Your Honor, I have. We would ask the court to set the status hearing in a week or two to make a final determination.
Okay. And Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings are in agreement with that.
That's fine with the state, Your Honor.
I will go ahead and set this matter for a status hearing then on the calendar on January 12th at 10 o'clock a.m. We will make sure notice is sent, and then Ms. Taylor, do you wish to argue bail at this time?
Your Honor, I would like to ask the court to consider setting a bond. Mr. Kohberger right now is on a no bond hold, but it's a limited request as I don't have enough information. We are new to the case. We haven't reviewed very much in the way of information about the case, and we have just begun our own work on the case. But we would want the court to know that Mr. Kohberger has a good family that stands behind him.
And Mr. Thompson.
No, the state's position is Mr. Kohberger is not entitled to bond in this case because the charges, as is noted on the arrest warrant itself. Idaho Code 19-816-19-2903 both specify that given the potential penalties in this case, there's no right to bail. The defendant was arrested 3,000 miles away across the country, where his family is. We ask that he remain in custody. No bail.
At this point in time, pursuant to Idaho Criminal Law 46B and Idaho Code 19-816 and 2903, I am going to leave the bail set at this case as no bail at this point in time until I have additional or further information at a later date and time. So with that, then Mr. Kohberger, you will be remanded in custody and remain in custody on the no bail pending further proceedings in this matter. Is there anything further in the case then for today, Mr. Thompson?
Commissioner, the state is asking for no contact orders for various family members of the deceased and also for the surviving roommates. I spoke briefly with Ms. Taylor. She indicated there's no objection.
Ms. Taylor, is that correct?
That is correct.
So I will go ahead and issue those no contact orders. So I do have a no contact order then for the named individual of Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk, as well as the family members and Mr. Chapin. The family members are Ms. Kernodle, excuse me. Yes, Mr. and Ms. Laramie,
So that was indeed the much anticipated first court appearance by Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger, and you heard from the judge there is no bail for him, and it's been a big day for this case as a long affidavit with new bombshell details were also dropped. When we come back, our very own Anjanette Levy, who is in Idaho covering this case, will join us and have more details and also the latest. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Michelle Yu. As you know, we have been following the University of Idaho murder case. 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger had his first court appearance today, and our very own Anjanette Levy was there for the whole thing, and we have her here now. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Anjanette. What is the latest that you can tell us?
Well, Michelle, this was a very brief hearing, somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. And of course, we expected it to be brief. The magistrate judge read the charges to Bryan Kohberger. He entered the courtroom in an orange jail jumpsuit. There was a lot of security there. There were some plainclothes sheriff's deputies there, some captains, along with other people, Moscow PD. There were a couple of officers there, of course, with the lead detective on the case, Detective Payne, from the Moscow PD. So the Gonsalves family came in, sat in the front row. Steve Gonsalves had his arm around his wife, Christy. She was kind of dabbing tears. At one point, he kind of just, really lovingly touched her hair and kind of moved something and then kissed her really gently. on the forehead, on the side of her head. You know, you can see he's trying to be a rock for his family. And then once they started reading the charges, Christy Gonsalves started to cry, as any mother would, and she wiped tears away. There was another woman with her, I think it must be a family member, who also started crying. And they were talking about the murder charges, you know, the first-degree murder charge. They went in order of Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan. And I think that must have something to do, I'm thinking, with possibly the order in which they believed these offenses occurred. So it was a brief hearing. Bryan Kohberger very just succinctly and directly, when asked, said yes. He understood the charges against him. He seems to understand his rights, and he's being held without bail. And prosecutors are pursuing the death penalty in this case. If you read the probable cause affidavit, what struck me as being so interesting was the fact that they were on to Bryan Kohberger pretty early on in this investigation. There were all these people online and sleuths and stuff. Oh, they don't have anything. They're not, you know, they're not telling anybody anything. It appears they were on to him pretty early on. This happened on November 13th, and I'm going to have to look back at my notes. But it was somewhere like not too long after that, a couple of weeks maybe, that they identified him as somebody they were looking at. Just, you know, the vehicle information from the surveillance video that they were able to collect from the neighborhood, the cell phone information, et cetera. So, of course, it was a brief hearing, as I mentioned. He's being held without bail. No preliminary hearing date set just yet. But obviously a very solemn and somber hearing inside that courtroom. It couldn't be anything but that.
And Janelle, we have about a minute here. I wanted to ask you, you talked about Bryan Kohberger, not many emotions coming out of him. Can you talk a little bit about his demeanor in that courtroom?
Well, we could only see him from behind, from where we were seated. But he walked in, he sat down. He just, you know, I didn't expect anything. I didn't expect an emotional response from him at all. You see that a lot from people charged with crimes. Of course, he's innocent until proven guilty, but there wasn't any, you know, thing exuding from him. When we saw him walked through the hallway in the courtroom or the courthouse in Monroe County, Pennsylvania the other day, no emotion. So I didn't expect to see that. So he just very, you know, deliberately said yes. He understood when he was asked if he understood the charges and things like that. And he said he does have appointed counsel. This is somebody with a PhD, or was pursuing, I should say, a PhD in criminology. He's a smart guy.
Yeah, he certainly is. All right. Well, Anjanette, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we're going to hear more from you in a little bit. As for us, I want to thank Katie Smith and Matt Mangino for joining us. Much more on this case ahead on Law and Crime. Stay with us.
Welcome here to Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy, coming to you live from the courthouse in Latah County, Idaho. This is where Bryan Kohberger made his initial appearance on those 4 counts of first-degree murder, just a short time ago. It was a brief court appearance. He is being held without bail in the Latah County Jail, which is right over here behind me. The courthouse is right behind me as well. We have a lot to talk about this hour. The probable cause affidavit that we've all been waiting to see was released earlier today, as we expected, full of details about this investigation. Bryan Kohberger saying he didn't do this. He had said that through his lawyer in Pennsylvania, now making his first court appearance here in Idaho to answer for the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin back in November of last year. So we're going to be taking your questions. We want to have you submit those to us on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, in our YouTube chat, and we will do our best to answer them. So I want to bring in one of our guests for this hour, though, first. She is Sunny Slaughter. She is a law enforcement instructor and also used to work for the Department of Homeland Security. Sunny, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. Just your thoughts initially on this affidavit and the details that it contains.
The affidavit is really extensive. It provides a great deal of detail, which is why this arrest was made. It actually provides more information than I thought it would, looking through it earlier today. And this is some significant information. So as we know that Bryan is the alleged perpetrator, but law enforcement really did what they needed to do to gather the information to submit this probable cause affidavit and to get it approved and issue this warrant and have him taken into custody.
It is a lot of interesting information. It's a lot of information. It's a 19-page document, and keep in mind, one of those pages said it was redacted. So there's still some information that we are not privy to. There is cell phone data that was used in this investigation, DNA testing and evidence and analysis used in this case, and also just some good old-fashioned, law enforcement, kind of gumshoe detective work where they went door to door looking for surveillance footage. So a lot to discuss this hour. But let's get to our questions, Sunny. Our first question comes from Chelsea Lee Copeland from Facebook. She asks, did I read the affidavit correctly? Was there a camera inside or on the outside of the King Road residence that picked up a whimpering and a thud? Sunny, I know it's a lot of information in there, but I think that is correct. It was on another home. So tell us about how important that is, the whimpering and the thud, coupled with the roommate, hearing and seeing this guy in the house. Talk to me, though, about how important that surveillance footage is in determining the timeline in this case.
So the surveillance footage was very extensive, and they really did, as you said, some gumshoe detective and investigative work, pulling all of that information in. The questioner did get that information right. That is stated in the affidavit, that there was a thud, there was some whimpering, and that video footage allows law enforcement to actually pull in more information and closer to the timeline. It is a part of how this will unfold in a courtroom, giving a very specific timeline as to what may have been going on at certain times. There's extensive footage that they have found and located, being able to connect the dots, along with how many times the particular car and similar type car that Bryan drives was in the area. 12, according to the affidavit. They're seeing a car that was similar to that. Video footage and the in-person ID of who I will name DM as one of the other individuals who was in the home at the time. That's critical information.
And Sunny, I have a question for you as somebody who instructs law enforcement and somebody who worked at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm a little bit shocked, and maybe I just need some more information, that roommate identified as DM in that affidavit actually saw this person person leaves, she says, through the sliding glass door, and said she was frozen, according to the affidavit, and yet police aren't called for hours later. I know these are college kids. She could have been inebriated. Who knows what was going on? But what are your thoughts on that? I'm just really shocked by that revelation.
I agree with you. When you said she may have been inebriated, that is one of the things that I said earlier. The shock of it all, and actually not knowing what she heard, and that there was someone in the home. Remember, these are college individuals. They have people maybe in and out, friends, somebody that she didn't know, even though the person was identified as being covered. We're not sure what her state of mind was. And although we think we know what we would do in a situation when there's an encounter, I think her not screaming or responding in a way that triggered any additional effort on behalf of the alleged perpetrator may have saved her life. And it did take a long time. You're talking about hours and hours before 911 was called, but we don't know what else was going on, whether she fell asleep, what was going on in her state of mind. It is curious, but I do believe that law enforcement has taken the time and the effort that is necessary to extensively question her, to make a determination as to whether she was involved. And her ID testimony is going to be critical in the court case and what we see going forward.
I agree with you 100%. Her testimony will be very, very important should this case eventually get to trial. We don't know how it will be resolved, but you know, we're very early on. We just had the initial court appearance today, and certainly not blaming DM at all. Just a really it's a pretty wild fact that's contained in that affidavit.
To ask.
Let's get yeah, definitely. If I see somebody in my house, guess what? I'm getting out of there and I'm calling 911. So let's get to our next question from Katrina McClough from Facebook. And Katrina, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name properly. It could be McClough. She asks, is it possible that he intended to kill everyone in the house? What I think is interesting about that question is the fact that it sounds like he saw DM, Sonny, from what we read in the affidavit, but Ethan didn't live there, so we don't even know if, you know, the perpetrator knew Ethan was going to be there. But your thoughts on her question about whether or not he intended, the suspect and the perpetrator intended to kill everybody in that house?
Well, first of all, when you think about how many times when I read the affidavit and the number of times that he has been in the area, that leads me to believe that he was potentially surveilling the area if he is in fact guilty of this particular crime. 12 times in an area where you don't have any presence, I believe that he may have been watching them. And in addition to that, the manner in which he moved about the home is rather interesting, and the potential that it sounds crazy, but maybe he was tired. That 4 people is a lot of individuals to have to wrestle with, to figure out how to murder them. The time is all very convoluted and what is taking place. And there was probably intent, and something may have triggered him to say, you know what, not right now, let me get out of here. He may have been startled by the fact that someone was still up around that time, moving about. So he may have been equally triggered to not continue. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And as far as, oh, no problem. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I thought you were finished. As far as him allegedly being in the area 12 times, you know, throughout August up until the offenses, it really makes you question why was he there? One of those events was on August 21st of last year when he was pulled over on the corner of there was an intersection, Farm Road and another road near the residence for a seatbelt violation. So why are you over there so much? It's not uncommon from what we've heard from people for students from Pullman to come over here to Moscow. But Sunday night at 11:40 at night, I mean, you're probably going to have class or you're doing a teaching assignment the next day. So it really does raise a lot of questions. Let's get to our next question. This is from Michelle Tamon from Twitter. Can he buy a Marine Corps knife without being in the Marines? Here in Brazil, this would be a crime. And was his father in the Marines? Ooh, good question, Sonny. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question, whether his family member was in the Marines. But yeah, that's probably something that he's, you can buy from a store. Sometimes people have access to weapons and going into the store. But I thought about that earlier, that it was a very specific knife. And it might not be his father. It might be someone else that was in the family that had access to be able to get this particular knife. And being someone that is a hunter, or it wouldn't necessarily be impossible or necessarily illegal, except for the extent that the length of the blade and the dynamics of it would cause law enforcement some suspicion and ask a lot of questions. And I'm not 100% familiar with the Idaho law and the length of the blade of a particular weapon being allowable to be possessed by individuals with no reason, if that makes sense to the individual asking the question.
Yeah, certainly. Different countries, different laws. And Michelle, we really appreciate you watching all the way from Brazil. Thanks so much. All right, we are going to take a quick break, but we need you to keep sending in those questions on Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, and on our YouTube chat. We'll be right back. I'm Anjanette Levy, coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho, and you are watching Law and Crime. Brazil, that's amazing. Hey, how are you? Good. Have we shown the Shannon Gray slot yet? Because I don't feel like we should show. Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho, where Bryan Kohberger made his first court appearance on those 4 first-degree murder charges just a short time ago. We are taking your questions, so please keep them coming to us. Submit them on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and on our YouTube chat, and we will get to them, as many of them as we possibly can, and answer them for you. As I mentioned, that initial appearance wrapping up just a short time ago here at the Latah County Courthouse. Bryan Kohberger is in the Latah County Jail, being held right over here. He's being kept separate from other inmates. That's pretty standard procedure in a high-profile case, and other accommodations are being made for him as well. So let's listen to a little bit of what Shannon Gray, he is the attorney who represents the family of Kaylee Gonsalves, had to say after this court appearance where Bryan Kohberger was ordered held without bail.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Shannon Gray. I'm the attorney for the Gonsalves family. We're not going to be taking any questions at all. It's obviously an emotional time for the family, seeing the defendant for the first time. This is the beginning of the criminal justice system, and the family will be here for the long haul. And that's the statement for the media today. Thank you.
And that was Shannon Gray, the attorney representing Kaylee Gonsalves' father, Steve, who you probably saw there next to him, and Kaylee's mother, Christy. Steve, very stoic throughout that hearing. Christy becoming emotional when the charges were read, as any mother would. It's just absolutely unimaginable what these people are going through. Joining me this block is Jennifer Koffendorfer, a former FBI agent, and still with us is Sunny Slaughter. She is a former, she used to work at the Department of Homeland Security and also is a law enforcement instructor. So thanks to both of you guys for being here. We're taking your questions. Let's get to this one, and I will throw this to you, Jennifer, since you're just joining us. It comes from Champagne Princess from YouTube. I always enjoy these usernames. Did they ask if he pleaded innocent or guilty? Even though he's guilty, don't they have to give him a chance to answer? Well, you know, he's not guilty yet. I mean, he's presumed innocent, so we need to be clear on that. But Jennifer, they did not ask him that question. Tell us why they didn't ask him how he pleads at this stage in the case.
Oh, this isn't the stage where that is done. This is not the time to for him to make a plea. This is the time for him to have his initial appearance, and that is it. It's not the time for a plea. So there are very set stages of this process that we're going to be seeing, and you have to fall in line with each stage. So we're just one stage before that stage.
Right, most certainly. And they're setting this for there's going to be some type of status hearing. Ann Taylor, the public defender representing Bryan Kohberger, asked for that. So a preliminary hearing date has not been set yet. And for our viewers out there who might not know what that is, a preliminary hearing comes after the initial appearance, and that is where prosecutors are required to put on evidence to show the judge, look, we have probable cause. Probable cause is a very low bar in the legal system, so they don't have to present all that much. They would usually call a detective to the stand to talk about the investigation a little bit, so they just have to get over that hurdle. Then the case moves to district court, and it is there that he would be arraigned and asked to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. Every defendant goes into an arraignment and pleads not guilty for the most part, especially in a case as serious as this one. He could also waive. We don't know if he'll waive that hearing. Let's get to our next question. This says Robin's Viewpoint. She is from YouTube, Robin's Viewpoint is, and she asks, wouldn't the survivor who saw him be able to tell LE, law enforcement, if he had blood on him? Sunny, I'll toss that question to you. What do you make of that question? What do you think about that?
Well, it depends on the lighting, how much she saw, how long she saw the individual for, where he was in the process of potentially committing the crimes. And she said she froze. She's not sure but she did see the eyebrows. So it depends on, it's probably a heavily saturated crime scene, but it's just too hard to speculate We don't have access to the 911 tape, so we don't know what she said during that call. Most of the time, people, as Jennifer said earlier, we're not at certain stages yet. This is an entire process that has to play out. And most of the time, people think law enforcement presence begins at the crime scene, and actually law enforcement presence begins with a 911 call. The investigation and the timeline starts there before law enforcement actually has a physical presence. So there may be information that we won't be privy to because there's a gag order in place that may have indicated whether there was blood on the individual and what DM saw at that time.
Yeah. Our next question comes from Miriam Shiro from YouTube. Jennifer, Miriam is asking, how did he know where the victims were and how did he maneuver around and about killing folks when it was so dark? That's a really good question.
Well, we don't necessarily know that he knew exactly where the victims were. He entered that house. We know that he killed 4 victims and at least went to 2 rooms where those victims were killed. We know what he did based on what DM says, that he at least came down those stairs and apparently in front of her. I will say that I think an important point about DM is that you are in, or she would have been in, a complete state of shock and tunnel vision that happens when one gets scared. You focus in typically on one thing or another. We see this all the time in law enforcement, in shooting incidents and so forth. And what they see is what they are tunneled in on. So it doesn't surprise me that maybe she focused in on those bushy eyebrows, but didn't see other things that might have been happening before her. Again,
Right.
in a state of shock, probably seeing this.
Right.
Yeah, I can only imagine seeing somebody in your home, and we don't know, you know, Sunny and I were talking about this earlier. These are college students on a weekend night. There was a big football game before that, so, you know, they may have had some drinks and been a little tipsy. We don't know that, but it's a pretty startling detail to read that she actually came, you know, pretty close to this guy, saw him, and then he left. And maybe he leaves because he's like, I got to get out of here because something else might happen. Let's get to our next question. At Mr. Conspiracy _ from Twitter. Will the defense be likely to ask that files remain sealed? Sunny, what do you think of that? Because there are cases sometimes when both parties, both the prosecution and the defense, will file things under seal. Not everything, but some things are filed under seal because they may possibly contain test results or information that could be deemed prejudicial. So do you anticipate the defense doing that in this case?
I would anticipate that defense might want to do that. It's such a high-profile case. The defense wants to keep. Law enforcement has already kept everything close to their vest, and the defense might want to do the same to ensure that when they are identifying what information, because this is a very extensive affidavit, and I would just suggest or say that that might be a likelihood of them. I don't think he was as smart as he thought he was, if he is the actual perpetrator of this crime. And depending on also who his representation was. Earlier today, I heard some folks talking about the potential for a pro bono attorney coming into town, high profile, or someone trying to, you know, get this on their radar and under their belt. And usually that it would be something that they might consider.
This would be a really huge case. I mean, think about the discovery alone in this case. I think it'll be terabytes with all the video evidence, test results, other items of evidence. So this would be a big case to come in and say, hey, I'll take it pro bono. So I don't know if I see that happening. A lot of people think it might. Our next question comes from @MacTrucker _1 from Twitter. What are the odds of finding blood DNA inside his vehicle? Jennifer, we've been talking about this. Surely a multiple victim stabbing homicide would leave a lot of DNA in his car. So, Jennifer, we think possibly the FBI was processing this vehicle for the evidence. So what do you think the likelihood is, even if somebody tries to clean something up, that there could be still some DNA evidence in the vehicle?
I think very likely. I want to check all of those little ridges on the foot pedal that he uses. I want to check where he might open up a glove compartment, the underside of that. I want to check every nook and cranny of every piece of that vehicle, because I believe there is no way that with all the blood involved in this case, he would have been able to clean that vehicle thoroughly. I think this is going to be a bit of a treasure trove for law enforcement, because I don't think, no matter how good of a cleaner he might think he is, assuming he committed this crime, a narcissist often believes they've done a perfect job at everything, including cleaning, but they're going to leave those little specks in nooks and crannies that they don't think about.
I agree with Jennifer.
And
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes, even if maybe you don't find that DNA, I mean, if we're thinking, and not to be too gruesome, if this was as bloody as we can only imagine, that there might be something left there. And sometimes even a cleanup job, guys, is circumstantial evidence that can be pretty damning. What do you think of that, Sonny?
I do. And in the affidavit, it talked about a latent footprint. And as Jennifer just went through, the carpet, the fibers, everything in that car is going to be critical, is going to be important. And, you know, if you look at the picture of the vehicle in the body cam footage, you will see that the car has the gear shift. You know, most of the time people are thinking you can just wipe that. But with this amount of blood, I'm thinking every single thing, the ignition, the radio, I mean, everything is going to be critical. The FBI has the access to power and the means to get that done. Taking the car apart is going to be very important. That's what they do. They're the experts at doing that. And I think that they're going to find something. You cannot completely clean a car. And as somebody who has worked on cars and placed engines and everything, there is DNA, there is something. The FBI is going to find it if this person is the one that is guilty of this crime.
We will be interested to see eventually what was found in that vehicle, if anything. And we should mention Bryan Kohberger, through his attorney in Pennsylvania, maintaining his innocence. We are going to take a quick break. Keep the questions coming on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook, and we will get to as many of them as we can. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you're watching Law and Crime live from Moscow, Idaho. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy, coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho. I'm in front of the Latah County Courthouse. The Latah County Jail is right to the side of that, and that is where Bryan Kohberger is being held without bail at this time for those 4 first-degree murder charges and 1 count of felony burglary for the murders of those 4 college students, Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, last November in their home off campus, just a short distance from where I'm standing right now. Bryan Kohberger had his initial appearance in court a little bit ago. Let's take a look at some of what went on during that hearing.
Count 4 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Xana Kernodle, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and/or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 5 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died, in violation of Idaho Codes 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. And again, the maximum penalty for this offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohberger, would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?
I have court-appointed counsel.
Court has reviewed your application for attorney at public expense. I do find that you are indigent and do qualify for court-appointed counsel. I will appoint Ms. Taylor to represent you in this case. Ms. Taylor, have you had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Kohberger about speedy preliminary hearing and setting this matter?
Your Honor, I have. We would ask the court to set the status hearing in a week or 2 to make a final determination.
Okay. And Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings, are in agreement with that?
That's fine with the state, Your Honor.
And that was just a brief portion of that 13-minute hearing, the initial appearance for Bryan Kohberger here in Latah County Court. He won't be in court. We don't know when the next time he'll be back in court. They're going to have that status hearing later in the month, but maybe he'll be there. Maybe they'll do that on the phone. We just don't know at this point in time, but we'll try to get some more information on that for you. We are answering your questions this hour, and we have a lot of great questions coming in, and we hope you keep them coming to us. Here's one of the questions from Rachel Byington from YouTube. Does anyone know, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you this question. If the intended victim or the target, I think is what they're trying to say, Kaylee, if she was the intended target because he was obsessed with her, maybe, were the other 3 victims murdered simply because they were sleeping in the same area of the home? Just from the little bit we know from the probable cause affidavit, Jennifer, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that are this. We know from Mr. Goncalves, he says that there's a connection, but he's not comfortable with discussing it. So we don't know yet the true connection that might or might not exist. Secondarily, no, I don't think that he just had one target. Look, he went to 2 separate rooms. He climbed stairs to get to the other room. So he entered and killed 4 people in 2 different places. So clearly, to me, it speaks to that second, or the room on the second floor, which was Xana and Ethan. That was the initial room he went to, and he was not satisfied, obviously, going to that room, and then entered the other room in search of others, including Kaylee, that were, of course, then murdered.
One of the things that I thought was interesting was the order in which the murder charges were read. They started with Maddie and then went to Kaylee and then to Xana and Ethan. And it made me wonder if that was the order in which these crimes were committed, the homicides, and how they were able to maybe determine that. Maybe there was some, technology involved with that. We've heard speculation about an Apple Watch and things of that nature. Sunny, this next question I'm going to throw to you. It comes from a Scotian_wave33 and on Twitter, and I don't know if this is like outside of your area of expertise, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it anyway. Thinking along the lines of criminal profiling, what typically motivates this type of crime?
I think it has to do with being a narcissist and arrogance, and that sometimes people cannot get their way. When you think about the level of detail and the amount of victims that were involved, the number, the potential for surveillance, pre-surveillance, which makes this first-degree murder charge really significant. Sometimes people who are predators have this very specific behavior. They're keying in on the victimology of a certain individual. And since we don't understand what the potential relationship was, I think there's a lot that we can speculate on. But clearly, this individual was determined, and this crime was pretty well thought out, in my opinion.
And that's what they're alleging. They're saying that it was premeditated. They talked about malice aforethought when they read those charges. That's some language in the statute that basically says this was planned. So let's get to our next question from Bams from YouTube. And we don't know the answer to this question. It's one that's burning. I think it's a burning question on everybody's mind, Jennifer. Is there any sign he might have known them beforehand and acquainted with the victims in some way to know the area of the house? Your thoughts on that, Jennifer?
Well, again, we do have some little tidbits that have us believing that indeed he was familiar with these individuals. We have, after, I guess the initial question is, how did he initially target the individuals living there? Then after that, we see that he's surveilling them. I believe he targets, and then he sees he's got what we call a soft target. He has people going in and out. It's very easy to surveil because it's a not well-trafficked place. There's a tree line that hides him. It's just the perfect opportunity. If this is your target house, it meets all your standards. Easy to get into, lots of traffic. It's the perfect target place. How he came upon her, there's so much out there that hasn't yet been confirmed by law enforcement.
Yeah, and we really don't know. We don't know, and the police said this early on. We don't know if it was the house that was targeted or people inside. And it makes you wonder, wow, is it possible? Is it possible that somebody wanted to commit a crime such as this one and simply drove around and picked a house? I guess anything's possible. Random crimes are pretty rare, but we'll just have to wait and see as this case unfolds. I interviewed the Gonsalves family attorney earlier this week, Shannon Gray, and he told me that they're looking for connections. They haven't established it just yet. I know there's been some comments out there about what Steve Gonsalves said. So I don't know. Maybe they've found something, but Shannon Gray didn't seem to think they had. So it'll be interesting to find out. I'm going to take a question from 5 bags of popcorn, and I'm going to answer this question, and then I'll ask you ladies the same. What's something that really stands out to you in this case? And that's Neil in Manhattan, and Neil had a really nice note for me too. Thank you, Neil. You're very sweet. What really stands out to me in this case, at least from the probable cause affidavit, is the fact that the roommate DM heard these noises. She heard some type of crying, or at least it was on the surveillance video, and she said she heard somebody say, "I'm going to get you help," or "I'm going to help you." That to me is absolutely stunning. And the fact that there was some type of whimpering sound on that surveillance footage is so startling to me. And reading through that probable cause affidavit really paints a picture that is nothing short of a horror story. I cannot imagine being in a home and having somebody enter a home and carry out something like this. Everybody has the right to be safe in their homes. Sunny, what stands out to you from this case?
I would say almost the same thing, but the level, I think he was really surveilling the individuals. I think this was calculated. If he is the perpetrator, I think the amount of times that the cell phone towers, the videos can place him in an area that we have yet to determine whether he had any reason to be there. I think that they were the targets. One of the victims was the target. I don't know which one, but I think one of the victims was the target. And I think that this individual may have been in the home at some point prior to.
It's entirely possible. Everyone said this is a house where there were a lot of parties, and we've heard from so many people in this area that people come over from Pullman. It's not uncommon. It's another college town. Washington State University is there. They come over here because the bars are better, and there may be a better party scene over here. So it's possible. We just don't know. We need to get the answers to those questions. Casey Olson from YouTube. Jennifer, this is a question for you. What is your opinion of the suspect's criminology studies and the discovery of the knife sheath, which is really a key piece of evidence in this case? That seems like such a rookie mistake. Jennifer, your thoughts?
You know, it's so interesting. That was going to be my answer to the other question. Was stunned out of everything. The big shocker to me was that sheath that was left behind. This is a huge mistake, obviously, not only because his DNA was tied to that sheath, which to me is the strongest piece of evidence. We can take all these other little pieces of evidence and link it together and make a beautiful circumstantial case with the phone pings and the cars and everything. But that is not insurmountable. What's insurmountable is this DNA on the sheath and explaining how that got there next to Maddie Mogan. So this is amazing. It's, to me, in his flurried action of committing these stabbings, he made a mistake. You know, this is the interesting thing about these types of criminals. They fantasize about how this is going to be. He had surveilled for such a long time, for months before this crime. And in their minds, there's this fantasy of how it's going to play out. Only it never plays out that way. There's blood that gets in your eyes. There's noises that are made. There's a dog that decides to bark. And all these things are distracting and taking him away from his moment of unleashing his fury. And I think because of that, he made a sloppy error, and that was that sheath, leaving it behind.
It's unbelievable to me if you're going to do something like this. And that makes me think that possibly, and I could be wrong about this, that Maddie and Kaylee, and I mentioned earlier the way they read those charges. Maddie was the first one they read, then Kaylee. If the sheath was there, it makes you wonder, did he hit that room first? Is that where he went initially and then went downstairs and then exited? And when I say that, I mean the perpetrator. He's maintaining his innocence. We need to be very careful not to convict anybody. Everybody has a right to a fair trial. We are going to take a quick break. Keep the questions coming in. I'm Anjanette Levy, and we are coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho, and you are watching Law and Crime.